Hey, I'm Mike Jackson here from Best of Tetons in beautiful Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Hey, recently I did a project in Lightroom Classic featuring some of the new masking tools that are in the program. And, I brought the image from beginning, middle, and end. And, when I finally got to the very end, I realized that Lightroom did a really good job on it. But there are some things that are snags at the end, like little spots and halos and lines between, the sky and the background. And really the best tools for doing those are in Photoshop. And that's what this video is all about. I take that finished image from Lightroom and I go into Photoshop and do some cleanup detail work. And, within 10 or 15 minutes, I got it to the point where maybe if I wanted to, I could go ahead and print it large without all the flaws. So that's what this is all about. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll catch you at the other end of this. I just want to show you, some of the tools that I would use in Photoshop and how I would do it. I'm not going to get into a deep dive on every little final nuance of it, but one of the things I've done is I made open it up from Lightroom, and I made a copy of it. So they're exactly the same. That way I can always go back to the background copy if I want to. And after a few minutes of working on it, it looked more like that. I got rid of some of those problem areas, and even went a little farther and took the power line out. I don't know that I want to take that out. I just show you that I can. And so one of the areas that has a lot of problems, let's say, is right in here. And you'll see it in a lot of images. There's a few basic concepts within these tools, and I'm really only going to be using a couple of tools here. One of them is going to be the spot healing brush, and while it's in that brush, you can see that it's set to content aware, and then I have that shortcut key is J. The other tool that I'm going to use a bunch is going to be the clone stamp tool, and that shortcut command is S. So we zoom in on this. I'm on the background tutorial copy here, and a couple of things that you would notice is I can use back out. Let me fix these little buttons here, little dust spots. And so I hit J. I can increase and decrease the brush size by using the front, forward, and backwards brackets. And I'm in that tool. Bang, 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 bang. Drag around. If I see anything that's kind of goofy, can fix those real quick. And I think that's pretty much all the spots. That's pretty easy. Now I'll zoom in a little bit here. I've got my mouse set to zoom by going up and down. Okay, so the main two tools, like I said, are the healing brush over here in content aware, and then I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. Now the clone stamp tool has a few really nice features, and one of them is if I'm using at 100% opacity, 100% flow, using scrubby sliders, you can drag around, makes that real quick. So one of the concepts with the clone stamp tool is if I hold the option key down, it samples that spot right there. Okay, and if it's at 100% and normal mode and I just paint over here, it's going to paint that color over here. I'm going to undo that. And one of the features that's really nice for this tool is if I decide that I only want to darken, all I have to do is change that to darken, and I'm probably bring the opacity down just a little bit just to make it work, and then I'll reduce the brush size. I go find a sample area, I'll hold the option key down, and because it's in darken mode, it won't apply any color to anything that's darker than it is. And so you'll watch me click fairly often, watch that change. So click, sample, paint, click, paint. And in this case, if this little panel is darker or lighter in this case than the background, it'll actually paint onto that. And I really don't want to do that, so just be a little bit careful. Option, click, and then it's kind of the same thing over here. I'll click and just be a little more careful. And one of the alternatives I could have done is I could use the marquee select tool, make a box over that, I nudge it over a little bit with the keyboard, and now if I do the same thing with the clone stamp tool and just hit S, and if I do the same thing, it's going to constrain it to inside that that box that I created there. So that's a nice little tool. Now nothing's going to happen outside that box, so Control Command D and I can deselect that. If I see I still miss a little bit up here, I can still go back and clean that up a little bit. Once you have the basic concept of using the spot healing brush and the clone stamp tool and going back and forth between those two, and the idea and concept of using it in normal mode and then also in darken mode, and you also can at times use lighten mode, it depends on the image. You get the idea that it goes pretty fast, and you can use the masks that are built into the sky or the subject. You can use those tools and go back and forth between different kinds of selections, with or without selections. That works too. And so I'm going to speed that up. We'll get to the point where we have everything except the snow. At this point I have pretty much everything worked out at the top half of the image, and just have the snow on the bottom, and I can show you how to do that real quick. One of the things you might think about doing is making a great big clone stamp and getting a sample over here and then just dragging them across. A lot of times when you do that you get waves, and you likely will get repetition. Like you see these three rocks, and there's three rocks, and then there's a pile of grass over here and a pile of grass that just looks just like it. So I typically wouldn't do anything like that. I would Control or Command Z and back out a few steps here, and I'll show you how I would do it. And this time I will use the other brush, the J brush here, and you can see that it's doing content aware fixes, and it goes pretty fast. The brush needs to be just a little bigger than what it is you're trying to clone. Content aware. Alright, so you get the idea. Now the other option, then, this one does a fairly good job. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of blur and slop, but it would be probably the right one to use here. You also can use the clone stamp tool, and I have a tendency there to do these things kind of small. Hit the option key and just kind of drag around. If you get too big of a brush, you'll get kind of fuzzy edges around it. So I tend to see go small chunks, and theoretically you sample often, and that keeps you from having repeats around. And I can grab some samples over here, some of that extra kind of golden grass over here. I just don't want to do too much of it at one time, because then you will see the repetition. Alright, and I'll make the brush size a little smaller, and I'll just go over and grab a few little oddball places and just kind of fill them in here and there. Just enough so it doesn't look sampled. People really aren't going to be looking as much down in this section. It's supposed to be a little bit blurry. The out of focus depth of field section, and so I don't get that worried about it. I'm just trying to make sure I don't have a bunch of patterns repeating. Like I can grab this little section right here, and I just got to make sure I don't show that it's repeated. And let's grab just a little bit more. I'm going to call this done. Well, hopefully after watching this little short video clip, you get some kind of idea that Photoshop has a bunch of tools that Lightroom simply does not have, and some of these tools are real important, especially if you get these halos and white spaces in between the background and the sky, or lights in the darks. They're almost impossible to fix in Lightroom. So these tools are, as complicated as Photoshop is, these tools are not that hard to learn. And I think that if you're a Lightroom user, it might be worth it to you to go learn at least this group of tools. There's a lot of information on how to use all these in all over the internet, but at least today, you got an idea of what you can do. And certainly, I was going through this pretty fast doing the video, plus I have to talk. And, I can go through it a lot quicker on my own, and you would be able to do the same thing. So anyway, this is Mike Jackson here in Best of Tetons, beautiful Jackson, Wyoming, and